Hi everyone and welcome back to another painting tutorial. So today I'm going to show you how I paint faces for my Space Marines. Now I wouldn't by any means class this as a masterclass, however I'd say it's around intermediate. So obviously there are a multitude of different ways you can paint skin tones, however for this one I'll just be going for essentially around a mid-tone Caucasian skin tone. So over a white scar undercoat, I'm just going to apply approximately 3 to 4 really thin down coats of CADIAN FLESHTONE. Now in my opinion, it's really important that you have the paint especially thin down when you're painting skin tones, as you really want each transition of colour to be really smooth and really subtle, as it is with skin in real life. Yeah, so the aim ultimately, at least when I'm painting skin tones, especially for humans, I should say, I'm really aiming for it to look as realistic as possible. So after having applied approximately, as I said, 3 to 4 really thin coats of the CADIAN FLESHTONE, very watered down, I'm now going to begin shading all of the flesh with very thin down DOOMBULL brown. And just to mention as well, the only brush I'm using throughout this tutorial is my RAPHAEL 8404 size 30 brush. And yeah, I really highly recommend using a really fine detail brush whenever you're painting skin tones as well, well faces I should say. Just to really maximize the control. As you can see, it's just making it that much easier for me to apply all of the shading and of course all of the highlights when we get there. So just be really patient with the shading process as well, just really take your time, don't apply it over the entirety of the face, unless of course you are wanting to shade with something like Guilliman Flesh contrast paint, then of course you could thin that down and apply that all over, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'll just be shading really carefully with the DOOMBULL brown. And as you can see, very watered down, I really wanted this to be very subtle. And as you can see around the hairline, just shading it down a little bit more there, and also in the deepest recesses of the eye. Next up, I'm just going back to CADIAN FLESHTONE, and I also have some other flesh tones ready to go on my wet palette. And I should just mention now as well, I really highly recommend using a wet palette whenever you're painting faces. It's just so much easier to just jump back and forth between all of those colors, as opposed to just using a dry palette and then the paint drying on you, especially if it was a mix. Let's say if you were doing a 30-70 mix, or even a 50-50 mix, if it's constantly drying out, it gets pretty annoying. I learned that when I first got back into painting in 2018. It took me quite a few years to use a wet palette. However, I'm really glad that I made that change. It doesn't go without saying that the dry palette is still useful. I tend to prefer using, for example, a dry palette whenever I'm using metallics. However, for details like this, it's just so much better having a wet palette. And depending on what one you get as well, and they are sort of a long-term investment as well, like you can get many, many years out of them. Most of them though are fairly affordable, so definitely worth checking them out. So as you can see as well, I've just moved on to CADIAN FLESHTONE and KISLEV Flesh, looking at roughly 50-50 mix. And I'll really try for this one to let most of the tutorial sort of speak for itself, because you'll find that throughout the tutorial I really do jump back and forth between these colours, and that's just to really help blend the very gradual transition of how flesh tones look in real life. As opposed to just having, you know, sort of one colour and then jumping to another sort of solid highlight. It doesn't really work the same way with flesh tones, in my opinion. I just prefer it to look really subtle, the transition of colour. And then just with my small pool of KISLEV flesh, I'm just going to continue highlighting. So one of the key things to remember when painting faces as well is really try for each progressive highlight, and keeping them as subtle as possible is to aim for the most raised areas of all of the details on the miniature. And to continue highlighting even further, I decided to mix in some white with KISLEV Flesh. Again, a 50-50 mix, approximately. If you're wanting to build it up even more gradually, you can just add even smaller amounts of white to the KISLEV Flesh and make further pulls of paint on your wet palette. For example, let's say 20% white to 80% KISLEV Flesh, and then you could do you know, you gradually work your way up to 50-50. But again, really just trying to keep this as a sort of intermediate sort of tutorial for faces. So I decided just to do the 50-50, and as per usual as well, for those who are regulars to my channel, you would likely know that heavy titanium white in my more recent tutorials has become my preferred white acrylic. However, any white acrylic will just do just fine. So as you can see there as well, in the deepest recesses of the cheeks, I am avoiding that area with the brightest highlights. So just working the highlight down very gradually across the jawline, and then just around the scarring as well, and of course the most raised areas of the chin and the cheeks, eyelids of course, and the forehead. Next up, I'm just going to further shade in the eye area with RHINOX hide. Now, there was a time where I used to just use black, Abaddon black for example. However, I found that using warm brown tones created a more gradual sort of finish between where the eye will be and where the skin is as well. But of course, there are so many colors you can use for this. I've also used purple, for example, in the past, especially when painting elder around their eyes. Next up, I'm just going to paint all of the hair with some black, Model Color by Vallejo. Any black will do just fine. However, I really do love the very matte finish that the Model Color Black by Vallejo has, which is what I really wanted for this particular style that I was going for. And just make sure that you just do a couple of thin coats of this one as well. Next up, I'm just going to, as you can see there, I've got some Dawnstone down. I'm just gradually mixing in some of the black. And just around the sides of the hair there. I suppose I could just call them sideburns. Although maybe perhaps a little bit shorter to be sideburns. But yeah, just essentially just using that as a shade around that area. Where the skin tone and the hair gradually blend. And just to add a little bit more depth to the scarring, and a bit more realism I suppose, I'm just going to very carefully apply some Screamer pink into all of the scarring. Now of course scarring doesn't always occur on every single face in Warhammer, however it's a really cool feature, and just adding this little bit of colour can add quite a bit of an effect to the final finished product. And now just to add a little bit of a difference to the finish on the lips as well. Of course I was highlighting the lips the same as the rest of the face before, but I'm just now very carefully shading in some very thin down pink horror just over the bottom lip. Again, really just trying to go for that sort of realistic finish. And just to add a bit more depth as well to the mouth area, just through the center between the lips, I'm just going to add a little bit of Screamer pink. Again, this is really subtle. You can make this a bit darker if you'd like to. I just wanted this to be a really sort of subtle finish. And now I've just gone back to Dawnstone, and this is very, very thin down, as you can see. And this is just to add essentially what a lot of people would call the 5 o'clock shadow. So it's important just to gradually work this downwards, as you can see. So for this particular model, this is, for those who don't know what model this belongs to, by the way, it's Captain Vitrian Messinius. He's the captain of the White Consoles. I believe there was a book written about him, or at least that he's heavily involved with. He was gifted his Power Fist from Robu Gilliman as well, which I thought was really cool. It's an awesome model. It's from the Black Library, I think it was 2023 release, or perhaps a little bit earlier than that. But anyway, it's still widely available if it's a model that you're interested in. So yeah, I can't stress enough though, this step, if you are adding a bit of facial hair over the skin tone, it's just super important that it's heavily watered down to the point where it's almost running just as water. Because yeah, you really don't want this to be applied on too thick, as it will be very noticeable. You just want it to be a really gradual transition so that it looks quite natural. So just be patient with it. Stipple on quite a few times with the Dawnstone. And as you can see, just around the hairline there as well. Again, just to create that sort of separation and that sort of natural look of how hairlines sort of look. Just to mention as well, I did have a small pool of Administratum grey there as well. So you can just add a little bit of that lighter grey to the Dawnstone and just continue to very, very lightly stipple the paint onto just around all of the facial hair areas. And now just going back to the heavy titanium white, I'm just going to begin painting in one of the eyes. However, for this miniature, Vitrian Messinius is blind in the scarred eye, so I'll be doing a different color on that side. And now just to highlight all of the hair, I'm going back to Dawnstone. Still just using the same brush as I mentioned earlier on in the tutorial, and I'm just going to carefully pick out all of the most raised areas of the hair. And once again, just going back to Administratum Grey just to further highlight all of the hair. However, I won't be going over all of the hair, mostly just around the front of the hairline. Next up, I'm just going to paint in the blinded eye using BAHARROTH blue. This is my go-to color for blinded eyes. I suppose alternatively as well, you could use like a vibrant sort of grey blue, like Blue Horror by Citadel, for example. But yeah, BAHARROTH blue works really well. Next up, I'm just going to paint in the eye with RHINOX hide. Now, after you apply the first dot for the eye, it's important, in my opinion, just to take a moment and see how the eye looks. For example, what direction it's looking in. Is it looking too much up at the sky? Is it looking too far left or too far right? Or, you know, depending on the posture of the design of the miniature as well, that can certainly help depict what direction the eye should be looking. So just a couple of things to keep in mind that, you know, I find useful when I'm painting faces. As you can see as well, just using the absolute tip of the brush, barely any paint on the brush. It's really important when painting the eye, just to make sure that the paint, of course, is thinned down enough, not to the point where it's just running watery, but you don't want it too thick either, but just enough to maximize the control. And again, a wet palette can really help with this, as whatever consistency you get it to, and once you get it to the right consistency, it will stay that way for, you know, well and truly long enough to get the application right. And as you can see, I just felt as though it wasn't, the dot point wasn't thick enough at the top. So I just went back and added an additional one as well. And now just going to Administratum Grey and the Heavy Titanium White. Looking at a 50-50 mix of this, I'm just on the most raised areas, going to stipple in just around all of the 5 o'clock shadow. And here are some photos of the completed miniature. So I hope you found this tutorial useful today. I definitely intend on doing more face tutorials in the near future, but I really hope you find this one useful. If you would like to support the channel further, the links are in the description below. If you're intending on buying any of your hobby needs, it doesn't cost you anything extra, but it does support the channel. So thank you very much for watching. I will see you again in the next one.